ॐ परतत्त्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्णसमाज्ञया यो धर्मस्थापनरतो वीरेशं तं नमाम्यहम्. Today is the last class on Karma Yoga. We are going to finish the book. But before we read that, one of the listeners has asked a question. So I would like to reply to that question first. And though the detailed answer was given in the chapter on freedom, but in a different way, we can give the answer. And the question is that who transmigrates? Atman, he says, the listener says, Atman is eternal and that Atman transmigrates. No, this is wrong. Now, Atman has different connotations, please, first of all. If Atman, we mean the self of all. Atman is not only eternal, Atman is constant, Atman is beyond everything, Atman is all pervading. So when the Atman is all pervading, where can it go? Where can it come from? Atman is consciousness by nature. That is the most fundamental thing. And consciousness cannot have any dimension. Consciousness is not a physical entity to have any dimension. Matter has dimension. Matter can go here and there. Consciousness cannot go anywhere. Now, as far as matter is concerned, matter has no consciousness, matter has no energy, matter has no movement. So, neither matter, that is our body, indriyas, mind, all this is matter. So, they cannot go anywhere. Atman, the self of ourselves, is the self of all. Where can it go? Swami Vivekananda in one place has given a beautiful example for that. One inspector in a school was asking questions and he asked a question, why does the earth not fall? Now he wanted some answer on gravitation or something. But when little girl replied, where sir would it fall? Where would it fall? That means by fall we mean something coming to earth. That is our meaning of fall. Now where earth would fall? Now, in the if you say in the space, space has no up and down and what is down and what is up. So that is the question. Atman cannot transmigrate. Matter cannot transmigrate. Then what transmigrates? The reflection of Atman on mind is I. I. Everybody feels he has an I. And this I is a reflection, a shadow of consciousness which is called Atman. And this I has mind as its associate. The reflection of consciousness on mind gives rise to a feeling of I. So I is ever associated with the mind. This we studied in the last chapter on freedom, that so long as there is association with the mind, there is no freedom. And when this apparent I merges into real I, or apparent I, necessary. When this apparent I loses itself, merges in the bigger I, real I, when the apparent I goes away, the real I shines. That is called freedom. Now, so long as this apparent I feels his own existence, it is always associated with the mind, it has desires, it does karma, and it has to reap the fruits of that karma. The real I never reaps any fruit of any karma. The real I never does any karma. The real I is not divided into a subject and object. This apparent I always feels it is a subject and the world is an object. World is full of objects. And so there is interaction between the subject and the object. And this interaction between the subject and object is called as karma. And because there is a subject and there are objects, there are essentially desires. Desires may be gross, desires may be subtle, but the attraction of the subject to the objects is called desire. And desire compels a man to do work. Throughout Karma Yoga, we have been studying this, that those who are content with the self, real I, those who are attracted to the real I, they have no work. Swamiji has told 2-3 times. All others, he said, have work. All others, I the doer, I the enjoyer. This I does karma, reaps the fruits, and all the fruits of all the karmas cannot be reaped in this very life. So at the point of death, when the body, the momentum of the body is exhausted, we are going to die. At that point, all the karmas have produced their impressions on the mind. And according to the mind, at the point of death, he has to get a body. Mind makes the body. So suppose the prominent impression on the mind is like the cat's mind. Automatically he has to get a cat's body. If at the point of death his nature is like a tiger, he has to take a tiger body. If he has done good works all his life, then his nature at the point of death is like a god, Devata. He has to go to become a Devata. If his good and bad karmas are equal, then he has to become a man again. So, according to the nature of the mind at the point of death, the next birth has to come. One cannot avoid. If one does not want that next birth, then he should give up the I itself. That is what Swamiji has told. If you don't want to die, give up life. So, when the real I shines, when the self shines, real self, Atman, has no death, no birth, no mind. It is one without a second. It is not only all pervading, but it itself appears as body, indriyas, mind, everything is his appearance. Where can it go? Where can it come from? So, this is the who undergoes transformation. This is the answer, that the I felt by ordinary people undergoes transmigration, not the reality called Atman, neither the body. So, this is the explanation of transmigration. Now we turn our attention to the chapter at hand, the ideal of Karma Yoga, and we have seen that this chapter is nothing but recapitulation of all the previous chapters. And so, Swamiji has shown in the last para that freedom is the goal and everything is trying to go to freedom. Then we come to this para that there is to be found in every religion the manifestation of the struggle towards freedom. That is the special field of religion. Because otherwise man does not know what is freedom. And he just tries freedom for his body or freedom for his senses or freedom for his mind, which is not possible. So Swamiji has told the chief's ideas freedom is different, the saint's idea of freedom is different. So it is the religion, that is the meaning of the word religion, please. Religion is not some ritualism. Religion is not some beliefs. Religion is the attempt of man to become free. Terms are different. In Christianity, it is called liberation. In Hinduism, it is called mukti. Some people call it uddhar. So, it is freedom alone, which is the field of religion. So, there is to be found in every religion the manifestation of the struggle towards freedom. It is there in every religion. It is the groundwork of all morality, of unselfishness, which means getting rid of the idea that men are the same as their little body. So the soul or Atman does not have dimension like the body. When we see a man doing good work, helping others, it means that he cannot be confined within the limited circle of me and mine. Because of the limited nature of body and mind, this selfishness, I repeat several times, egoism, selfishness, narrowness are the results of feeling this body is I am. But if he is doing unselfish work, that means he does not want to remain within the limits of his body. Can anybody explain why a man likes to work for others? It is only under the impulse of the universality, the universal soul which is in him, that he gets this impulse to work for others. Others apparently, it is only his own personality in a different way. There is no limit to this getting out of selfishness. No limit. All the great systems of ethics preach absolute unselfishness as the goal. Absolute unselfishness. That is possible when there is self-abnegation total. If there is no I, there is no my. There is no selfishness. So absolute unselfishness means no self, no small self at all. Supposing this absolute unselfishness can be reached by a man. Supposing means it is very good to imagine what happens if we reach the absolute unselfishness. It is not good to imagine that we have appeared there. You understand true imagination? What happens to me if I become 10% unselfish is a very good imagination. But if we imagine it has happened to me, then there will be a downfall because it has not yet happened. So Swamiji is telling, supposing this absolute unselfishness can be reached by a man, what becomes of him? He is no more the little Mr. So and so. Little means limited. He has acquired infinite expansion. That little personality which he had before is now lost to him forever. He has become infinite, and the attainment of this infinite expansion is indeed the goal of all religions and of all moral and philosophical teachings. Infinite expansion means becoming Atman. Body cannot be infinitely expanded, but the mind can grow, become light, as pure and infinite as the Atman itself, and that becomes freedom. The personalist, there are some people who want to hold on to their person, dualist. The personalist, when he hears this idea philosophically put, gets frightened. Oh, I don't want to lose myself. I don't want to die. At the same time, if he preaches morality, he after all teaches the very same idea himself. So morality is bound by unselfishness. And real morality means infinite unselfishness. Real morality means no self at all. Self abnegation is the real morality. So he may be an individualistic philosopher, but when he thinks of infinite expansion, then where is he? He puts no limit to the unselfishness of man. Suppose a man becomes perfectly unselfish under the personalistic system, how are we to distinguish him from the perfected ones in other systems? So, any system, the idea of perfection in any system is absolute unselfishness. Let me quote here Jesus the Christ. Be thou perfect, even as thy Father in heaven is perfect. Be thou perfect, even as thy Father in heaven is perfect. Father in heaven is the name of God in Christianity. Is God not infinite? Is God not perfect? If we are to become perfect like God, we have to become infinitely unselfish, though the system may appear to be personalistic. But this is what Christ wants us to do. He has become one with the universe, and to become that is the goal of all. Only the poor personalist has not the courage to follow out his own reasoning to its right conclusion. That is another beauty. You take any philosophy, it is based upon a particular system of rational thought. But the ration, if the reason in that philosophy can be pushed to the limit, we will find that philosophy breaks and we come to Advaita. Any philosophy in the world is based upon some rational thinking, so called rational thinking of a limited mind. And the reason he uses in that philosophy, if that reason is pushed to the end, everything according to that reason, we must land in infinite Advaitism. That is how the great Acharyas, Gaudpad and Shankar have taught us. So Swamiji is telling the same thing here. His own reasoning its right conclusion. Karma Yoga is the attaining through unselfish work of that freedom which is the goal of all human nature. All human nature goal is freedom, but they do not know how to use it. And there are several methods, as Swamiji has told in the beginning of this chapter. Karma Yoga is one of the methods where karma appears to be the predominant factor, though the change of consciousness is the main factor. Every selfish action, therefore, retards our reaching the goal, and, and every narrow action also. And every unselfish action takes us toward the goal. That is why the only definition that can be given of morality is this: that which is selfish is immoral, and that which is unselfish is moral. But if you come to details, the matter will not be seen to be quite as simple, because these are all relative terms. For instance, environment often makes the details different, as I already mentioned. The same actions under one set of circumstances may be unselfish, and under another set, quite selfish. So we can give only a general definition and leave the details to be worked out by taking into consideration the difference in time, place, and circumstances. For an example, if a man kills another man, it is a selfish action. But in the war, for the sake of his religion, for the sake of his nation, if he kills hundreds, that is a virtue because that is expanding his mind because of his duty bound to his nation. So, action is same of killing the others, but under different circumstances, it is moral or immoral. Whether he is doing it for a selfish purpose or whether he is doing it for a selfish purpose. Similarly, every action in a different set of circumstances will appear as selfish. In another set of circumstances, it will be unselfish. Time, place, and circumstances. In one country, one kind of conduct is considered moral, and in another, the very same is immoral because the circumstances differ. In some countries, brothers may marry sisters. In some countries, it is the highly immoral action. The goal of all nature is freedom, and freedom is to be attained only by perfect unselfishness. Every thought, word, or deed that is unselfish takes us toward the goal, and as such is called moral. So, according to the time, place, and circumstances, our mind feels selfish or unselfish, and if it becomes unselfish, that is moral, and that is taking off a chain. That definition you will find holds good in every religion and every system of ethics. In some systems of thought, morality is derived from a supreme being, God. If you ask why a man ought to do this and not that, their answer is because such is the command of God. But whatever be the source from which it is derived, that means people do not know that the morality is unselfishness, so they think God has commanded. That is Swamiji is explaining. But let us go inside that command and find what it is. But whatever be the source from which it is derived, their code of ethics also has the same central idea, not to think of self, but to give up self. And yet, some persons, in spite of this high ethical idea, are frightened at the thought of having to give up their little personalities. We refer to this during Patanjali Yoga Sutras also. And we quoted there Gaudapad Abhaya Bhayadarshina. They are afraid of something which is beyond fear. We may ask the man who clings to the idea of little personalities to consider the case of a person who has become perfectly unselfish, who has no thought for himself, who does no deed for himself, who speaks no word for himself, and then say where his himself is. We may at a stroke refer to Sri Ramakrishna. And on analysis, Swami Sardanji finds that absolutely there was no iota of selfishness. Every action was for the good of humanity. Every action, every thought, every word was not for his little self. That himself is known to him only so long as he thinks, acts, or speaks for himself. If he is only conscious of others, of the universe, and of the all, not of all, no, of the all, that means God. Where is he himself? It is gone forever. Karma Yoga, therefore, is a system of ethics and religion. Ethics means without the consideration of God, we are forming something, then it is called ethics. But if we have God inside that, it is called religion. That is the difference. Intended to attain freedom through unselfishness and by good work. That is the definition of good work. The Karma Yogi need not believe in any doctrine whatever. Again, that generalization, theorization, but unless, as I am telling again and again, unless we read Swamiji's Karma Yoga, we do not know at all this thing. He may not believe, the Karma Yogi need not believe in any doctrine whatever. He may not believe even in God, may not ask what his soul is, nor think of any metaphysical speculation, philosophy. He has got his own special aim of realizing selflessness, not unselfishness, but selflessness, self abnegation. And he has to work it out himself. Every moment of his life must be realization because he has to solve by mere work without the help of doctrine or theory the very same problem to which the Jnani applies his reason and inspiration and the Bhakta his love. Jnani applies his reason and inspiration. Reason means he understands this point, and inspiration means the higher experience. That is called inspiration. No, in the absence of any available term, Swamiji is using the word inspiration. It means aparoksha anubhav, it means alaukika pratyaksha, it means to understand that this I is not real, then you have to get an experience of the real I. That is called inspiration. And the bhakta is love. I told you several times that suppose we are sugar and we dissolve it in water, that is how the bhakta attains immortality. If we are camphor and we ignite it, that is how the Jnana Yogi gets his freedom. And as the sandalwood is rubbed and rubbed and rubbed out, that is how the Karma Yogi attains his infinite truth. Now comes the next question. What is this work? Now, unselfish work, Swamiji said. So now Swamiji is trying to explain that. What is this doing good to the world? Can we do good to the world? So this is another chapter where Swamiji said, we are doing good to ourselves, not the world. That para comes now. In a connected way, Swamiji is presenting the entire Karma Yoga in this chapter. In an absolute sense, no. In a relative sense, yes. That means world is a dog's tail, Swamiji had told. So absolutely good to the world cannot be done. But relatively, comparatively, something good is being done. No permanent or everlasting good can be done to the world. If it could be done, the world would not be this world. When incarnation comes and sets the world right, then why the other has to come? So many people struggle with unselfishness. The world changes for that moment and comes back like the dog's curly tail. We may satisfy the hunger of a man for 5 minutes, but he will be hungry again. Every pleasure with which we supply a man may be seem to be momentary. No one can permanently cure this ever-recurring fever of pleasure and pain. Fever of pleasure and pain. Always he wants pleasure, always he gets pain. We may give him pleasure, again he will get pain. Can any permanent happiness be given to the world? In the ocean, we cannot raise a wave without causing a hollow somewhere else. This is from the first chapter itself. The sum total of the good things in the world has been the same throughout in its relation to man's need and greed. Need and greed. Greed means he wants more and more, others will not get it. It cannot be increased or decreased. Take the history of the human race as we know today. Do we not find the same miseries and the same happiness, the same pleasures and pains, the same difference in position? Eternally people have tried for samatva and eternally the differences are there. Are not some rich, some poor, some high, some low, some healthy, some unhealthy? All this was just the same with the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans in ancient times as it is with the Americans today. So far as history is known, it has always been the same. Yet at the same time, we find that running along with all these incurable differences of pleasure and pain, there has ever been the struggle to elevate them because that improves us. We try to elevate somebody's pain, that expands our heart, that makes us more unselfish. Every period of history has given birth to thousands of men and women who have worked hard to smooth the passage of life for others. And how far have they succeeded? We can only play at driving the ball from one place to another. We take away pain from the physical plane and it goes to the mental one. It is like that picture in Dante's Hell where the misers were given a mass of gold to roll up a hill. Every time they rolled it up a little, it again rolled down. All our talks about the millennium means Swarna Yuga or Ram Rajya, where everybody will be happy. That is a dream, that is an imagination. All our talks about the millennium are very nice as schoolboy stories. Motivation comes, some motivation, but they are no better than that. Only schoolboy stories. All nations that dream of the millennium also think that of all people in the world, they will have the best of it than for themselves. By suppressing others, you will become happy. That is millennium. This is the wonderfully unselfish idea of the millennium. Group. Selfishness in a group. They call it enlightened selfishness. If you are fighting as a nation to destroy other nation to get millennium in your country, We cannot add happiness to this world. Similarly, we cannot add pain to it either. The sum total of the energies of pleasure and pain displayed here on earth will be the same throughout. We just push it from this side to the other side and from that side to this, but it will remain the same. Because to remain so, it is very nature. This ebb and flow, you have to observe nature and find this out. This ebb and flow, this rising and falling is in the world's very nature. It would be as logical to hold otherwise as to say that we may have life without death. The example of one candle lighted is the best. It has started living, it has started dying the same moment. This is life and death. How can we have life without death? How can we have death without life? This is complete nonsense because the very idea of life implies death and the very idea of pleasure implies pain. He has given the example. The lamp is constantly burning out and that is its life. If you want to have life, you have to die every moment for it. Life and death are only different expressions of the same thing, looked at from different standpoints. They are the falling and rising of the same wave, and the two form one whole. One looks at the fall side and becomes a pessimist. Another looks at the rise side and becomes an optimist. Swamiji's wonderful analysis. When a boy is going to school and his father and mother are taking care of him, everything seems blessed to him. His wants are simple. He is a great optimist. But the old man, with his varied experiences, becomes calmer and is sure to have his warmth considerably cooled down. There is a shloka in Ramayana, beautiful shloka. Rama is telling Lakshmana that when our father was living and we were newly married and our mothers were there to take care of us, those days are gone, Lakshmana, those days are gone. Tehi no divasa gata. जीवत्सु तातपादेषु नवे दार परिग्रहे मातृभिश्चिन्त्यमानानां ते हि no divasa gata. So they have to go. How they can continue? You have to take care of your children now. The parents are not there to take your care. And you cannot always be newly married. Marriage will become old one day. Now Swamiji is applying it to nations. So old nations with signs of decay all around them are apt to be less hopeful than new nations. There is a proverb in India, 1,000 years a city and 1,000 years a forest. This change of city into forest and vice versa is going on everywhere, and it makes people optimist or pessimist according to the side they see of it. Now another idea of millennium, equality for all. Swamiji says equality for all will happen only in the pralaya time. The next idea we take up is the idea of equality. These millennium ideas have been great motive powers for work. Let us work for equality, which can never come. When there will be temperature equality, the earth will vanish. Many religions preach this as an element in them that God is coming to rule. Even now, when you go by train, we see written in big letters on the walls. Suvarna Yug aayega, Ramaraj aayega. That God is coming to rule the universe. And that there will be no difference at all in conditions. In the Ramayana, there is a story. Sita asked Rama, Rama, you make everybody his house as perfect as our house. Rama said, okay, I made it. Then the Mistri, the technicians, they all came and we have no work now, what to do, how to eat food. So that is all the nature. The people who preach this doctrine are mere fanatics. So this is a wrong idea. They hold on to a wrong idea. And that is called fanaticism. And fanatics are indeed the sincerest of mankind. That is the problem. The fanatics never understand their fanaticism. They think they are the most sincere people and they kill others. Christianity was preached just on the basis of the fascination of this fanaticism. Swamiji is very clear in his thought, huh? And that is what made it so attractive to the Greek and the Roman slaves. In Greece and Rome, now we think of our Jati Pratha. But in all the olden countries, even today, many places, there are bond slaves. They are not citizens. They are not voting rights. They have nothing. They are bond slaves. And when the equality was preached, they thought, oh, we become Christian, we will be equal. Same is the case today. From Hinduism, people get converted to Buddhism with the idea that there will be no caste. They get converted to Sikhism, thinking there will be no caste. They get converted to Muslim to think that there will be no caste. And we know in the social field, even the Sikhs, there are the Harijan Sikhs, there are the Jat Sikhs, there are the Kshatriya Sikhs, there are the Brahmin Sikhs. And they want, in India, they want reservation for the Dalita Christians, for the Dalita Muslims. Then why have become Muslims or Christians? So we cannot get rid of this. You call it by any other name. In America, they say class and mass. Celebrities. In other caste, these days has become another caste. Celebrities. That means more money simply. How you are different from him? So this equality is impossible. That is what Swamiji is showing. They believed that under the millennial religion, there would be no more slavery, that there would be plenty to eat and drink, and therefore they flocked around the Christian standard. Those who preached the idea first were, of course, ignorant fanatics. They thought like that out of ignorance and they preached it. But very sincere. In modern times, this millennial aspiration take the form of equality, of liberty, equality, and fraternity. That was the slogan of the French Revolution. Liberty, equality, and fraternity. This is also fanaticism. You know, they guillotine the emperors. And when the other party won, they guillotine these people. So it is impossible something. One person, some name Patwardhan, I remember, long time back, a nice book he had written, The Mirage of a Classless Society. It is a mirage. Now, I will tell a funny story. In Indian Railways, previously, there was first class, second class, intermediate class, and third class. Now, you thought of reducing. We did not reduce the third class, huh? We reduced the first class. Second class became the first class. Inter became the second, third. And now what is happening? Hundreds of classes in Indian trains. Trains themselves different. AC trains, Garib Rath, Rich Rath, and first and second and third, AC first, chair car. How many classes we have made? Impossible to have the same class. True equality has never been and never can be on earth. How can we all be equal here? This impossible kind of equality implies total death. When total death, then all are equal. Whether the king is there, whether the poorest man is there, whether the saint is there, whether the sinner is there, in death, all are dead. What makes the world what it is? Lost balance. That is the Sankhya idea, beautiful. In the primal state, which is called chaos, there is perfect balance. Before the world is created, there is balance. How do all the formative forces of the universe come then? By struggling, competition, conflict. Suppose that all the particles of matter were held in equilibrium. Would there be then any process of creation? We know from science that it is impossible. Disturb a sheet of water, and there you find every particle of the water trying to become calm again, one rushing against the other. And in the same way, all the phenomena which we call the universe, all things therein are struggling to get back to the state of perfect balance. And we have great problems about what? Global warming. Global warming is going to happen. Sun will give its warmth to earth, and when the earth will raise its heat, all will become same by dying, are struggling to get back to the state of perfect balance. Again a disturbance comes, and again we have combination and creation. This is the Indian idea of the cyclic nature of the creation world. No big bang or small bang. The world runs in cycles, expansion and contraction, evolution and involution. So that is what is going on. Inequality is the very nature, basis of creation. At the same time, the forces struggling to obtain equality are as much a necessity of creation as those which destroy it. That is the fun. Otherwise, destruction will be very quick. So there are forces struggling for equality that retard the process of destruction for some time. But if all equal, then again destruction. So these forces are natural in the world. We may, the religious people will call this is all God's Leela. What can you do to it? Absolute equality, that which means a perfect balance of all the struggling forces in all the planes, can never be in this world. Before you attain that state, the world will have become quite. अरे बाप रे, रोज ही हो रहा है. लाना ही नहीं चाहिए था. Before you attain that state, the world will have become quite unfit for any kind of life, and no one will be there. If the temperature rises, no one will be there. We find, therefore, that all these ideas of the millennium and of absolute equality are not only impossible, but also that if we try to carry them out, they will lead us surely enough to the day of destruction. What makes the difference between man and man? It is largely the difference in the brain, thinking process he means. Nowadays, no one but a lunatic will say that we are all born with the same brain power. They used to think, eh, what they say, blank slate of mind. In that you can write anything. It's not possible. How some boys, girls learn quickly, some boys do not learn at all, because the brain power is less or different. Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar asked Sri Krishna, is there difference in the universe? Sri Krishna said, if there was no difference, why would we have come to see you? Have you grown horns? Because you are superior in certain respect, people pay respect to you who have come to see you. We come into the world with unequal endowments. We come as greater men or as lesser men, and there is no getting away from that prenatally determined condition. Prenatally determined. That means, unless you believe of the Purva Janma. Before this birth, we are different, and so we are born different. The American Indians, they were not Indians, huh? Red Indians, American Indians, do you know what happened? Columbus understood that the earth is round, and all Europeans were dying to come to India for the spices in India and the gold in India. And the usual route is very long. So they thought that instead of going east, if we go to west, we may quickly reach India. So from Europe, they started going west. And as soon as they got a land, they thought India has come. And then they understood we are nowhere. India is in the opposite direction. But that name came there. Red Indians. We have West Indies islands. India found on the west side, West Indies. Now Swamiji is talking of that. He is calling them American Indians. These days, the definition of American Indians will be very different. The Indians settled in America or their generation will be called American Indians. The American Indians were in this country for thousands. We must understand this, otherwise we will confuse with the modern. The American Indians were in this country for thousands of years, and a few handful of your ancestors came in their land. What difference have they caused in the appearance of the country? Why did not the Indians make improvements and build cities if all were equal? With your ancestors, a different sort of brain power came into the land. Different bundles of past impressions came, past impressions, and they worked out and manifested themselves. Absolute non differentiation is death. So long as this world lasts, differentiation there will and must be, and the millennium of perfect equality will come only when a cycle of creation comes to its end. So the process is cyclical. Before that, equality cannot be. Yet, this idea of realizing the millennium is a great motive power. Just as inequality is necessary for creation itself, so the struggle to limit it also necessary. Otherwise, the destruction comes sooner. If there were no struggle to become free and get back to God, there would be no creation either. It is the difference between these two forces that determines the nature of the motives of men. Some people work to go back, to be unselfish, and some people become selfish, make progress, and the relative balance between the two is the world. There will always be these motives in work, some tending towards bondage and others towards freedom. The world's wheel within a wheel is a terrible mechanism. Now Swamiji comes to that freedom chapter now. If we put our hands in it, as soon as we are caught, we are gone. We all think that when we have done a certain duty, you see now, we all think that when we have done a certain duty, we shall be at rest. But before we have done a part of that duty, another is already in waiting. We are all being dragged along by this mighty, complex world machine. There are only two ways out of it. One is to give up all concern with the machine, to let it go and stand aside to give up our desires. That is again, he has come back to that, the Jnani's way. That is very easy to say, but is almost impossible to do. I do not know whether in 20 millions of men one can do that. The other way is to plunge into the world and learn the secrets of work, and that is the way of Karma Yoga. Do not fly away from the wheels of the world machine, but stand inside it and learn the secret of work. What is the secret of work? Through proper work done inside, it is also possible to come out. Through this machinery itself is the way out. How? We have now seen what work is. It is a part of nature's foundation and goes on always. Those that believe in God, again the same thing. Theoretically, he is told so many things and comes back to that God. Those that believe in God understand this better because they know that God is not such an incapable being as will need our help. Although this universe will go on always, our goal is freedom. Our goal is unselfishness. And according to Karma Yoga, that goal is to be reached through work, not by work. All ideas of making the world perfectly happy may be good as motive powers for fanatics. But we must know that fanaticism brings forth as much evil as good. The Karma Yogi asks why you require any motive to work other than the inborn love of freedom. You love freedom, you love God, you love your brothers, and you are working. Be beyond the common worldly motives. To work you have the right, but not to the fruits thereof. If we can do like this, we go near the freedom. Man can train himself to know and to practice that. So that is the practice of Karma Yoga. Says the Karma Yogi. When the idea of doing good becomes a part of his very being, then he will not seek for any motive outside. Let us do good because it is good to do good. He who does good work even in order to get to heaven binds himself down, says the Karma Yogi. Fruit will bind you down. Any work that is done with any the least selfish motive, instead of making us free, forges one more chain for our rest. Okay, chain for our feet. So the only way is to give up all fruits of work, to be unattached to them. Know that this world is not we, nor are we this world. That means both are unreal. That we are really not the body, that is the world. That we really do not work. Really, we do not work. God is working. We appear to be working like the puppets. We are the self, eternally at rest and at peace. So again, he has brought the jnanam in this karma yoga. Either bhakti of God or now he has brought the jnanam. It is very good to say that we should be perfectly non-attached, but what is the way to do it? Every good work we do without any ulterior motive, ulterior means selfish. Instead of forging a new chain, we will break one of the links in the existing chain. Every good thought that we send to the world without thinking of any return will be stored up there and break one link in the chain and make us purer and purer until we become the purest of mortals. Yet all this may seem to be rather quixotic. Quixotic, understand? There was a fiction, there was a fantasy book called Don Quixote, and all his ideas were meaningless, impractical, irrational, but he thought of them and he worked. So, quixotic and too philosophical, more theoretical than practical. They appear, Karma Yogi's idea, how one can be fully unselfish, etc. I have read many arguments against the Bhagavad Gita, and many have said that without motives you cannot work. Even we meet with these people. They have never seen unselfish work except under the influence of fanaticism. And therefore they speak in that way. So example only proves the thing. Let me tell you in conclusion a few words about one man who actually carried this teaching of Karma Yoga into practice. Because his name was well known in the West, so Swamiji has taken that example. Not that he is the only one. That man is Buddha. We can take Swamiji's example himself. What selfishness he had in doing his work. What selfishness Sri Krishna had in doing his work. What selfishness Jesus had in doing his work. But because Buddha has become well known in the Western countries, Swamiji is giving his example. He is the one man who ever carried this into perfect practice. All the prophets of the world except Buddha had external motives to move them to unselfish action. That means from God, like that. The prophets of the world, with this single exception, may be divided into two sets. One set holding that they are incarnations of God come down on earth, and the other holding that they are only messengers from God. And both draw their impetus for work from outside. That means from God. Except expect reward from outside, however highly spiritual may be the language. So Swamiji is giving a model example. But Buddha is the only prophet who said, I do not care to know your various theories about God. What is the use of discussing all these subtle doctrines about the soul? Do good and be good. And this will take you into freedom and to whatever truth there is. it is almost impossible to follow this maxim. And believing in God makes the whole thing easy. That's Swami just told repeated. But he's giving a model example. He was in the conduct of his life absolutely without personal motives. And what man worked more than he? Show me in history one character who has soared so high above all. The whole human race has produced but one such character, such high philosophy, such wide sympathy. This great philosopher, preaching the highest philosophy, yet has the deepest sympathy for the lowest of animals and never puts forth any claim for himself. He is the ideal karma yogi. One who does not require karma yoga is the ideal karma yogi. We have to learn from him. Even about the disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother said, they do not require any karma, but they are doing it. You take that as an example. He is the ideal karma yogi, acting entirely without motives, and the history of humanity shows him to have been the greatest man ever born, beyond compare the greatest combination of heart and brain that ever existed, the greatest soul power that has ever been manifested. He is the first great reformer of the world has seen. He is the first to dare to say, because believe not because some old manuscripts are produced, believe not because it is your national belief, because you have been made to believe it from your childhood, but reason it all out. And after you have analyzed it, then if you find that it will do good to one and all, believe it. Live up to it and help others to live up to it. He works best who works without any motive, neither for money, nor for fame, nor for anything else. And when a man can do that, he will be a Buddha. And out of him will come the power to work in such a manner as will transform the world. This man represents the very highest ideal of Karma Yoga. So, through an example, Swamiji has given the idea of without any belief, how one can be a Karma Yogi. And side by side, he has every time pointed that when one believes in God, it is very easy to follow Karma Yoga. So now we have come to the end of the Swami Vivekananda's book Karma Yoga. Today was all the recapitulation except for the example, and from you will get the circular announcement. From the coming Monday, we shall start discussing Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga. We have planned that we are going to discuss Swamiji's yoga. After Bhakti Yoga, we will go to practical Vedanta and Jnana Yoga also. So, next item is Swami Vivekananda's Bhakti Yoga. Om परतत्वे सदा लीनो रामकृष्ण समाज्ञया यो धर्म स्थापन रतो वीरेशम तम नमाम्यहम् ओम शांति 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 हरि ओम तत्सत श्री रामकृष्ण अर्पण।